What do you think about each day? How many topics? How many people? How many ideas? How many emotions? How many observations float through your brain on any given day? When you think about that, it's probably a pretty sizable number. In an age of multitasking, we pride ourselves on the ability to think about one thing while we're doing another, or sometimes doing two things and still thinking about yet another. But do we ever stop to think about why we think about what we think about? As rational beings created in the image of God, we have the ability to contemplate our own thinking processes, to evaluate those processes, and to try to shape their functionality, to change them. Any animal can choose to change its behavior in response to stimuli, but you and I can choose to change how we behave by changing how we think, and vice versa, precisely because we choose to do so. The ability to choose what we think about is either a great blessing or a great curse, depending in the end on what we ultimately choose as the focus of our thoughts. Let's begin then by looking at Paul's text here in Philippians chapter 4. We're just in verses 8 and 9 today. Beginning with verse 8, it says this: "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." Now, Paul tells us this, and this is a part of our process of moving from anxiety to peace. Remember that from before. One of the reasons why Paul is talking about what you choose to think about immediately after talking about utilizing prayer to help us replace anxiety with God's peace is that there is a connection between what we think about and what we feel. That's not a surprise to you. At least it shouldn't be. If my thoughts are happy, my emotions will perk up and follow suit. By the same token, if my thoughts are gloomy, it will drag my emotions down with it. Now, that isn't a hard rule. There are exceptions. You can have happy thoughts in a gloomy mood. You can have gloomy thoughts and still maintain a happy mood sometimes. But thoughts and emotions will always be linked together. Because that connection exists, it will help us in our efforts to let go of our anxiety by giving it to God in prayer, if we also at the same time attempt to focus our thoughts on things that will naturally benefit that process. By the same logic, it will make it more difficult for us to bring our anxiety under control if we allow our thoughts to dwell upon things which tend to hinder the process of trusting in God. Now this, contrary to what some people might say, is not about drinking the Kool-Aid. And if you don't get that reference, somebody will explain it to you later. You see, for some self-help gurus, psychologists, even people that claim to be Christian leaders and dignitaries, the answer to difficult thoughts or emotions or situations turns out to be an escape into unreality. In other words, the key in their advice to dealing with troublesome situations is to pretend they don't exist, or to pretend that they're not really all that troublesome. In our last message, when we spoke about anxiety, I made it clear that God is not asking you to pretend that you don't experience anxiety. Nor is God asking you to pretend that situations that will cause anxiety are not a part of the lives we're living. So denial was not the answer there, and it's not part of the answer here either. See, we're not trying to sell you on a plan that pretends that misfortune and troubles and disasters and errors and regrets and outright evil are not real. The power of positive thinking is not a Christian idea. God has empowered us to overcome reality, not to hide from it. The truth is that our world is full of negative, frightening, disturbing, revolting, and yes, evil things and people. Only a fool would try to tell you otherwise. So if God isn't asking you to pretend that bad thoughts are not a reality, what is He offering as a solution? What is the answer? Now, before moving on to Paul's proposed solution, let me make one more observation about the nature of the human mind. It has to think about something. We may say that our mind is blank, or might say that we're not really thinking about anything when someone asks. But that isn't the case. You see, you will think about something. Now, it may benefit you from time to time to look for quiet or solitude in order to, quote-unquote, empty your mind. Artists, writers often have to do that in order to focus on their work. But that is, at best, a temporary solution and not a foolproof one. You will think about something. You will be thinking always. The question then is, about what? In a moment we will look at Paul's list and examine it, but the overall point in that list is clear. Choose to fill your mind with good things, he is saying. That might seem like an easier said than done proposition to some of you. And for others it might seem like a well-duh piece of advice. Well, of course I need to fill my mind with good things. Give me something useful. But that is only the case if you still do not realize that Christianity was never simply about what you believe. It was and always will be about what you do because of what you believe. I mentioned earlier that our thoughts influence our emotions. It is also true that our actions influence our thoughts. If you do what is good, you'll think about what is good. But if you never do what is good, thinking about what is good won't do you any good. Did you get all that? Okay. Everything you do is habit forming. Both good habits and bad habits. Everything you do forms habits. If we choose to focus the actions of our lives upon the things of God, it will help us to change our emotions and our thoughts as well. You see, you will never perfect your thinking before you have to act. You can either start acting now and let your thoughts catch up eventually, or you can sit on the sidelines and try not to do anything. As Christians, as fellow servants alongside Jesus Christ, we do not have the option of doing nothing. We must act. So therefore, as we look at the things that Paul is telling us that we should think about, remember that you cannot divorce thinking from doing. With that in mind, this also becomes a list of how our actions should be described. Are the things that you are doing pure and lovely and admirable and excellent and praiseworthy? You see, the highly influential Greek philosopher Plato wrote this: to know the good is to do the good. In other words, teach people what is right, and they'll do it. But unfortunately, he had the cart before the horse, because to truly know the good, it has to be the other way around. To do good is to know good. So let's look at that list. Those are the things Paul lists in the verse: true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, praiseworthy. Now look at that list for a minute. How many of those things came to your mind the last time you watched the news or read the newspaper? You see, even when a reporter tries to give you a feel-good story, even when they go out and look for a story that will lift up our thoughts, they often fail to reach such lofty expectations. And even if they do, that's at the end of the episode or buried on page 4. It's in the midst, surrounded by tales of woe and death and mayhem and destruction and war and vice. You got one good thing, surrounded by a sea of troubles. No, I'm not advocating that we ignore the world around us, and I'm not advocating that you stop reading the paper and watching the news. I myself struggle if I miss the newspaper for more than a few days. I need to read it. I need to know what's going on in the world. I'm not telling you to hide from the world, because any serious examination of your neighborhood, whatever it happens to be, will reveal the exact same sin-drenched reality that you saw on the television or read about in the newspaper. You cannot escape from it simply by pretending. You cannot ignore what is going on. So how can you not think about it? Well, part of the solution to not thinking about negative things is to make sure that those things are not a part of your life. Before we can focus our energy as Christians on these virtues that Paul is telling us to think about, we need to first make sure that we are not contributing to their opposite, vices. For example, we'll start with the first one. To think on truth is to, by necessity, reject error and gossip and dishonesty and manipulation of the facts for personal gain. To think on truth is to reject half-truths and partial truths and self-serving versions of the truth, and truth that only applies when it's convenient to me. You see, if we're going to make room in our actions, in our emotions, in our thoughts for virtue, we first got to clear the garbage out and get rid of it. If you're going to embrace truth, you need to support truth tellers. You need to celebrate openness and honesty. You need to be a champion of truth, especially when it is not in your best interest. And you need to follow the truth, especially when it leads you where you don't want to go. Now, that same thing could be said for all of the things in this list. We need to rid ourselves of every manifestation of their opposite vice, and we need to fully embrace every manifestation of them, whether it be convenient for us or not. So how do I think about truth in a world full of error? By being its champion, by surrounding myself with others who value truth, and by walking each day in the truth. The more we become doers of the truth, the more our minds will be shaped by truth, the more we will think about truth. Let me give you a second example to see how you can go through each of these. We won't take the time this morning to do them one by one. Let's look at one more then, to see that you need to fully embrace virtue and fully reject vice in a process that involves not only your mind but your emotions and your actions as well. So let's look at the second one, nobility. It's an interesting virtue, because the first thing that comes to our minds when we hear the term nobility is that discredited system of family privilege that American culture has fully rejected because of its abuses and its lack of opportunity for everyone to have a chance to succeed. So the word noble and nobility's got some baggage. But look at the concept behind it. The concept is this, that some people in society can be more useful than others. And that certainly is valid. Now, the fault with nobility as a system is that it places that usefulness upon birth. If you are born into a family, you are more useful than others. And that is absolutely absurd. The truth of the matter is that those who have demonstrated virtue, people that are helpful, are more helpful to society. The people that work for its betterment. That is what nobility really is. So to think about nobility is to reject everything that is servile and crass and undignified and crude. To think about nobility is to reject pretensions and fame, ostentation, snobbery, self-importance. All of the things that are tied up into evaluating people in society by the wrong reasons. If we're going to embrace nobility, we need to support those who deserve recognition based on service, not on physical appearance or money or fame. We need to celebrate generosity of spirit and self-sacrifice. And we need to champion the cause of modern-day knights, those who are truly serving and protecting the poor and the weak and the needy. If we ourselves embrace in our own lives that which makes us noble, the things that reflect well upon the gifts we have from our Creator, then we will shape our emotions and our minds so that we can think about that which is noble. Excuse me. As I said, I could go through these one by one, but I hope that you already see the point. We need to develop our character as Christians by directing our thoughts toward virtue and rejecting vice. That process will only work when we integrate it with our actions and make it who we are on a daily basis. Remember, to think must be to do, because only when we do will we truly know. Now you may be saying, what if this, what if that? I know that some of you are wondering how you'll ever put into practice such a comprehensive list. That was a long list full of a lot of things. It seems daunting. But let me offer you this word of encouragement. Every single one of them is linked together. None of them stand alone. Virtues never do. It is not 8 individual virtues that we need to develop. Rather, it is one multifaceted virtue of Christ-likeness that each of us has been commanded to imitate. By listing them all out, Paul has simply shown us how full and how comprehensive and how complete our efforts must be to have so many interconnected virtues involved. In other words, keep focusing on being like Christ. And when you do, all of the virtues that God has will begin to grow in you. The list just helps us to evaluate ourselves, to think of ourselves honestly, and see where we are falling short. I know that others of you might be wondering how you will ever overcome one particular area. One thing in that list that is difficult for you, for your mind to think about. You see, we all have our own particular sets of resources and our own hindrances. They are based upon our past, upon our abilities, and upon our place in this world. And I know some of us struggle with mental illness, with depression, or with past trauma that hinders our ability to think clearly, to control our thoughts. But let me tell you this, God knows you. He knows exactly what you have to overcome to rid yourself of troubling thoughts and bad habits. Because God knows you and loves you, He is able to help each of us become what He needs us to be. No, this is not a promise that it will be easy. This is far from easy. But God's transformative power is available to all of His children through the working of the Holy Spirit. And lastly, don't forget this. You are not on your own. If you struggle with anxiety or fear or anger or jealousy or rage or resentment or anything that is keeping you from thinking on things like this, don't fight that fight alone. We are the church of God. We are here to support each other because we have a mission to accomplish together. We can pray for each other. We can help each other. Don't try to go alone. Verse 9, Paul says this, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. After telling the people of Philippi to think about virtue, Paul immediately tells them to examine everything he has written or everything he has spoken to them and everything he has done in their presence. Paul offers himself as a walking example of what a Christian who thinks about such things will be like. Now, Paul couldn't show them a glimpse of his mind. He could not open up his mind to them and see, this is what I think about each day, each moment. So he did something equally instructive. He pointed to his life and said, this is how I act. because of how I think. Can you imagine yourself being such a clear-cut, no doubt example of proper Christian living, that you could say to those around you, think about what I say and what I do and how I do it, and be like that? And it was not pride that caused Paul to think of himself and point to himself. It was experience. He knew that these virtues were alive and well in himself because he lived them every day. In essence, Paul is saying, be like me because I'm like Jesus Christ. Now, you and I don't know Paul. We haven't met him. So our inspiration for that comes from what we have in Scripture and from the other heroes of Scripture that we see how they lived. From the lives of the heroes of faith in history, there are plenty of them to emulate and look up to. And most importantly, from the examples all around us the examples all around us of mature Christians who have brought their thinking into line with what God desires for us by adopting the mind of Christ. And Paul ends us with this positive note: the God of peace will be with you. Let me answer 3 questions that may be lingering. First one, why does it matter what I think as long as I do the right thing? Some people will be thinking that. For this simple reason: God is not satisfied with transforming only part of you. A half-hearted attempt will never work. Our minds, our emotions, and our actions need to be one. Second question, isn't it good enough if I think the right thing? Not at all. Of what possible use for the kingdom of God is a Christian who never does anything like Christ? To think without doing is a complete waste. And lastly, what in the end is the result we're looking for here? What does God want for you? He wants these 3 things: a mind that thinks like Christ, in tune with our Heavenly Father; a heart that feels like Christ, yearning for righteousness and broken for the lost; and lastly, hands and feet that work like Christ, willing to serve, doing what we can to help the least amongst us, confirming our hope, our faith, and our trust through obedience.